Hello everybody. So I'm sure you've all seen the video where I showed you how to make a DIY NAS, and if you haven't seen that already, I highly suggest you take a look at it, but because you're going to need the context from that video to understand what's going to be going on in this video. Because in that video I didn't really cover the hardware side as well as I should. Let me just make myself bigger here. There we go. And so I'm going to get into more of that in this video because I haven't uploaded in a couple months an actual proper full-length video. My hands will show up on the screen. Not working too well. I need a green screen. But today we're going to be looking at what you should look for on the hardware side of building your own NAS. And while you could do what I did in that video, which is find some tower that you already had and repurpose it, today we're going to look at if you're going to buy some hardware, invest actual money into this is what you should look for. We're going to establish a few ground rules first. So what do you want in a NAS? So we obviously want a reliability, right? We also need something that's power efficiency, but without being too expensive. And then, as far as connectivity goes, is just kind of depending on what you're doing. If you're only doing like 4 drives, you could generally go with a more consumer platform. But if you want more than that, you'll have to start looking at proper server stuff. And even if you're not going with the massive amounts of drives, it can still be beneficial to go with the server hardware for reasons that I'm going to show you. So you want 4 SATA ports minimum, and onboard gigabit Ethernet, so you can get full speed on a typical home network over Ethernet to access all of your stuff. And those are kind of the basics for what you want. Now, in terms of other features that aren't necessarily needed but do make your life a whole lot easier, one of those is IPMI, which is a feature seen on a lot of server boards that allows you to remote into the board and monitor temperature and fan sensors, access the BIOS, reload the That's basically anything that you could do by plugging in a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse to the system. You could do over IPMI because the IPMI software runs on its own dedicated computer that's on one chip on the motherboard, so it's not software dependent. You can reinstall your OS, change BIOS settings wherever you want. And if you're going to be running something like TrueNAS or anything that involves ZFS, which will use your RAM for caching, you're going to want ECC memory, which can check for errors and then correct them in memory, so you don't end up with your read cache potentially being corrupted. And lastly, we want something affordable. No one likes spending thousands of dollars on server stuff. Some of the bigger channels go over all the crazy enterprise gear, which that's fine, but for your typical home user, that's not really the thing you need. So let's go shopping and see what we could find on eBay. Whoops, wrong window there. Hold on, what's happened here? Oh my WordPad, it didn't open it inside Sandbox. Hold on. Here we go. Yes, I'm running this inside of a Sandbox just to have it cleaner. And if you go on the internet to the garage sale or just eBay, we're going to start looking for things that we want that meet that criteria that we just laid out. And so the way that I would recommend doing it is seeking out older server gear rather than traditional desktop gear, because a lot of that older desktop gear has some kind of value as budget gaming, which kind of decreases the availability that you have. But the server gear is often overlooked, particularly the lower end server stuff, not the crazy 12 core plus systems. And for a basic NAS, 4 cores is fine, and in some cases ideal if your power is really expensive. So we're gonna find some server boards that can accommodate ECC memory and are also relatively power efficient. And if you don't know this, Supermicro is a big name in server boards, and having us being able to find a used Supermicro board is going to be pretty easy, because at least right now there's a lot of them on the market. Now, it doesn't have to be Supermicro. You can buy from other brands like ASRock Rack has stuff, particularly if you want to build something new with Ryzen hardware. They're pretty much the only option for desktop processors on server boards, so you still get that kind of server like IPMI type functionality. So that being said, let's see what we can find. So I'm going to type in Supermicro motherboard into eBay and just see what comes up. As you can see, these are rather expensive at first. There's one we're going to be taking a look at the second, although this may not be the best option here. You see there's loads of them. This one even includes 2 CPUs and an heatsink. This is a dual socket board. If you're trying to do something crazy, have lots of virtual machines, this might be something you want to look into. See, this one apparently has 10 solder ports, which is pretty crazy. But for a typical NAS, you don't really need this or really want this, because that's extra power consumption. And look at all of these. You got 2 8-pins and 2 4-pins you gotta hook up. You gotta figure out a cooling solution for these server CPUs, because these heatsinks are passive and they're meant to be mounted in a rack, and it won't work very well if you just put them in your normal tower. So we're gonna close that tab because we're not gonna be looking at that, and let's see what else we can find. Nothing really of interest down here, but I'm gonna scroll back up and you can see this micro ATX board down here. You can see it's the bare board only. There's no IO shield, which if you can't get that, it's not really a big deal. Yeah, it's kind of ugly and potentially leaves your system open to things like getting inside of it, but if you're really concerned about that, I'd recommend just taking some electrical tape, running it over the back, and then just cutting off the tape wherever your ports are. But you want to make sure that the server board that you get has IPMI, because if you're already going for server boards, you're going to pay about the same whether it's with IPMI or without. In most cases, there will be some outliers, and if you come across one of those, you need to not let that price tempt you, because having the IPMI really does make your life a whole lot easier, especially if you're not all that familiar with it. You have a how to do this thing on one screen, actually doing it on another screen, you know, to walk back and forth it, or fixing it remotely if you set it up wrong, because I've definitely made some mistakes. That's why you want IPMI. But so here it is. This is the X10 SLL-F. Some of them will say UATX, that's micro ATX. That's sort of the common modern motherboard size. It'll fit in a micro ATX case, but also fit in ATX cases and larger. So you don't have to worry about any weird case compatibility. This is a standard form factor board, but most of these consumer CPU-ish server boards are micro ATX, although some are full-sized ATX. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this model number. Actually, no, we're going to search for it on Google. And you can see the web page here. This page will tell you everything you need to run this board, what processors you need, what memory you need, what features it has. But see, this one does have IPMI 2.0 with KVM and a dedicated LAN, which is something you definitely want. As you can see, this is end of life, which we're not too worried about. You can see it works with Haswell generation i3s, Celerons, Pentiums, and Xeons that fit in the 1150 Intel socket. It's worth noting that you can't put Core i5s or i7s in these, because that's a limitation of the C series chipset. They don't let you put Core i7s in. And we don't really want to do that, because you're going to pay more for those and you lose your ECC memory functionality, which is really what you want in a budget server, so you don't have to worry about potential reliability issues coming from that. So As for CPU choice, we obviously see what we have here, but you want to make sure that whatever it is you do get is well supported by your board, whatever CPU you get. So it says it supports Xeon, E1200, V3, and V4. Or we could go the Core i3 Celeron or Pentium route. You could totally do that, but having 2 cores is going to be kind of limiting once you start to run things like maybe VMs or Docker containers, things that are going to put the CPU under load, and they're really not much cheaper than the Xeons, which are mostly quad core models. And so we're going to look for Xeon E3, so we're going to head back to eBay. It supports Xeon E3 1200 V3 and V4, and those are the ones you want, so we're gonna wait for Xeon E3 V4 first on eBay, see what comes up. And there are gonna be some crazy high listings. These are for the top tier chips. You're gonna see some E5s, those won't fit in the socket, those are 2011. You can see some pretty crazy prices here, quite insane. Yes, prices are insane, so we're gonna look for a V3 chips. Now we're talking. You see that there's various options here. There's the 1241, the 1270. Looking at about $19–20 a piece. See here, 1231 of the 1749. But here's a trick that we can do here. If you already like the board that you found, you're going to see if you can get it bundled with a CPU. So what we're going to do is copy it, paste it into eBay, and then type in with CPU, and see what comes up. Because you can often get them bundled for much cheaper depending on the situation. See, as you can see here, this one it at least has a cooler on. It doesn't make sure it explicitly says there's a CPU on it. This one doesn't say that it comes with a CPU explicitly, so you want to kind of be careful about that. It can be very confusing sometimes. You just gotta look through your options here. That's an X8 board. You don't really want to go that old. There's not really a ton of options here, so we're gonna choose the X10, like we had this one, and we're gonna pick the specific CPU that we want. Now, any of the 1200 series Xeons that are the V3 or the V4 will work. Obviously, the V3s are much cheaper. So, let's see, $1749 for a Xeon E3 1231 V3. So, we're gonna look this up and see what that processor is. Let's search on the web. Want to look, see if Tech Power Up has a page on it. Doesn't look like they do. At least it's on the first page. So we can go to Intel Arc to see the specifications for this chip. You can see we click on specifications. You see that this is a Haswell chip, which means it's relatively efficient. It's got 4 cores with 8 threads, so you get hyper-threading. It's got a 3.4 gigahertz base to a 3.8 boost. Doesn't have any QPI links because it's a single socket CPU. Although that may be incorrect. And you can see that it supports up to 32 gigabytes of RAM. The 2 channels. And it says ECC memory is supported. But worth noting here that Supermicro boards in particular are very picky about the memory that you give them. So you want to make sure that the board you do get will pair well with the memory you get. So this particular platform, the consumer socket Xeons on these server boards, you typically require ECC unbuffered memory. And if we go back to a Supermicro website, you'll see it the kind of memory that it supports. It says unbuffered ECC UDIMMs, DDR3 1600, although you can use slower. So now that we have that information, I'm going to go back to eBay. I'm going to type in DDR3 ECC UDIMM Super Micro. Because when you can, you always want to buy memory that specifically calls out the boards you have. Or at least the brand, because some boards are very, very picky on what memory they will work with, although some are better than others. You see, there's loads of listings here. Apparently someone's got 100 8-gig sticks. See, not really any for decent prices. See, that one doesn't even have a thumbnail. There's an entire server, which that's one use, so you don't really want to get that as your first server. That can be rather complicated. Okay, let's see what we can find. So if you can't find one that specifically calls out your board, that's not a huge deal. You'll just have to make sure you get one that accepts returns. So in the event that it doesn't work, you can just return it at no cost. Some of the sellers are better than others in terms of being willing to return it over stuff like that, but it just kind of depends. You can see here we have this memory modules from ATEC. I actually bought two 4-gig modules for my server, which uses a slightly older Supermicro board, but they work absolutely perfectly. These appear to be brand new memory modules. It calls out what it's equivalent to, which is this memory model number from Kingston, although that doesn't matter a ton. But if you're concerned about things like qualified vendor list, which you typically don't have to worry about, you should be fine. You want to make sure that this is a UDIMM, not an RDIMM, because those won't work. This is DDR3 1600 8 gigs UDIMM ECC. It's PC3, so that confirms that it's a DDR3 module. And for best performance with your Xeon CPU, you're going to want to get 2 sticks. So if we look at our board here, the Windows thing will go away. Where's our board? You can see it has 4 slots. And so you want to put either 2 or 4 sticks. If you only have 2, you want to use typically the 2nd and 4th slot, because if you use the 1 and 3rd, you can end up with some interference issues that could potentially lead to instability. Not as big of a concern with ECC memory, but it can't hurt. So this is the board we have. We could put the memory in there. And last thing to consider is cooling, which, because these Xeons slotted to a regular Intel socket, an older one, but it's still standardized, you can kind of put whatever cooler you want on these things. They don't draw a ton of power. They're rather efficient for the prices you can get them at. I mean, $18 seems pretty good to me. So that being said, we're going to look at some coolers. Now, you could go use for your cooler. I've never done that. There are a lot of new options for budget coolers these days, and obviously what you pick will depend on your case. If you want to go with the cheapest possible option, you can find an Intel stock cooler. Those typically leave something to be desired in terms of the thermals. but are just fine for basic things. So we're gonna find some coolers on Amazon if you don't want to go that route. One of the good brands out there is Thermalright, so I'm gonna look for Thermalright coolers, but actually no. We're gonna look at some coolers, so we're just gonna type in LGA 1150 because that matches the board we have. If I can find the web page for it, it keeps hiding under this thing. Just move out the way. There we go. The socket 1150. Type that in cooler into Amazon, and as you can see, there's loads of options, but you're gonna want to take into account things like case clearance and potential clearance issues with things on the board, as some things could potentially stick up and interfere with the cooler. As you can see, this particular board looks fine, but if you end up, it's a different one, you could potentially be concerned about that. As you can see, there's a replacement stock cooler. This is a cooler from Thermalright that actually includes proper heat pipes. It's only, 36 millimeters tall, features a 92 millimeter fan. You see, this will be good if you're working in a NAS specific case that has the like hot swap bays, or anywhere where you don't have a ton of clearance, 'cause that actually sits flat on the board. But as you can see, we have a Noctua cooler. If you want to put something really nice on there, you don't have to do that. As you can see, another Thermalright cooler. They have various different heights of them. You see, we scroll through. There's still loads of options. You want to make sure that whatever your option is supports LGA 1150, which is our socket, and will fit in our case. Now, I'm going to show you a cooler that I really like. The Thermalright SI100. You can see it right here. It's $23. It's similar to those low profile coolers, but it's much larger of a fin stack, and it uses a 120 millimeter fan. So that will allow you quieter operation and more airflow over your board area, because it's sort of a downdraft design, which is one of the big benefits of having a downdraft cooler is airflow around your socket, which is important for these server boards because they're not always designed with having no airflow around them. As you can see, there's VRMs here. You have your memory. You could have a expansion slot for networking or storage, which we're going to get to, or there's chipset, things that need a little bit of airflow to help stay cool, and having a design like this helps with that a lot. And before you say that Thermalright is some unknown brand, it is not. It's a relatively new brand, but they definitely know what they're doing, at least according to the benchmarks that are out there in terms of performance. And if you're, the most likely thing to fail is this fan, which if you're really concerned about that, you could put any compatible fan on here. Just make sure it's the same size. This isn't some proprietary fan, it's just standard sizing. You can just put that on there if you'd like. It gives you the fan specifications right here. 120 by 25 millimeters, 2000 RPM, 4-pin. So you can replace that with a Noctua or something if you don't particularly trust this fan. Now, for a basic NAS setup, you're done with the motherboard and CPU section. Now storage, we're going to talk about next, but you already have your storage situation figured out. You can see it, or you cannot, because you're still going to learn some pretty interesting stuff here. So as for your boot drive, you're going to type in any you can just get any basic SATA SSD. You just want something reliable. A Kingston, a 240 gig, wow, $28. I remember that these were down to like $20 at one point. But $27. These are DRAMless. They're not fast, but they are plenty reliable. If you can, I would recommend getting 2 of them. If you're going to be running something like TrueNAS that lets you mirror your boot OS across multiple drives, so you have fault tolerance on your boot volume. So if you're away on vacation or something and a drive dies, it's not the end of the world. Capacity isn't really a concern here. 32 gigs is plenty, but don't run this off a thumb drive, because that thumb drive will die rather quickly. And as far as storage goes, you can your mass storage, you can reuse old drives if you want, but if you're not one to back up your stuff, you're going to want to make sure that your drives are reliable. You're going to want to test them before you actually deploy them, because you'll be thinking you've done something wrong when it breaks later, when in reality a drive just died, because that happens. So we're going to find some hard drives on Amazon. I like other Toshiba M300 drives. That's what I have. They're pretty high performance drives, but they're still somewhat reasonably priced. You can find them in various capacities. I have a 4 terabyte, which is apparently out of stock at the moment. Yeah, these used drives you generally want to stay away from, but if you don't need the utmost in performance, or you're looking for something that is more efficient in terms of power, you can look at the Western Digital Red Plus drives. These are 5400 RPM, well, except for some models, which they're 7200, but they limit the performance, which I don't get, but that's the world we live in. These are CMR drives, which, if you're going to be using any kind of ZFS, any kind of RAID hardware, software, whatever, you don't want to use the cheaper stuff, which is SMRs. Those have much lower sustained write speeds, which can make a RAID rebuild go from taking a few hours to taking a few days. These CMR drives are much better suited for that. You want to look more into that. There was a whole lawsuit. You can see the regular drives, and not the Red Plus, just the standard drives. If I can find them, I know they're in here somewhere. Hold on a minute. I don't want the Red Plus. I want the standard red. Let's see. Here, this is it. It's $70. Only 9 left in stock at the moment. You can see this is the SMR variant. If you're not running any kind of a complex RAID setup, if you're just running like 2 drives in a mirror, these kind of become options. These are the only real problem with these is when you try to run them in RAID or any kind of task where you're writing to them loads at a time, they tend to slow down. So I would only go with these if you really know what you're doing. I would play it safe and stick to the Red Plus, or if you want something that's high performance, the N300, or even SSDs. Like, SSDs are so cheap now, you could totally do that. We can just look up like NAS SSD. If you stay, which I don't know what they want, $150 for that enclosure there. Got distracted. Yeah, you want to stay from these like weird brands like Gigastone. Yeah, you can go with NAS specific SSDs, or even just normal ones like Crucial SSDs. Crucial MX500. Let's search that up real quick. Oh god. what is up with Amazon's search engine? MX500. See here, a terabyte for $45. That's a pretty solid value. There are some cheaper drives like from Team Group or even Kingston that I showed you for your boot drive. Well, reliability from what I've had experience with those drives, because I do have a couple, they're fine, but they are pretty slow if you're expecting SSD tier performance from them. They are not suitable for any performance critical application. Even just like a boot drive on a normal Windows system, they're not fast enough for that. The only reason I have them is they're in 2.5-inch enclosures, and going with that was pretty close to hard drive pricing, or I think it's actually cheaper. And and I use them a lot. I move them around a lot, so having the solid stateness is potentially beneficial, and that's why I went with those. But if you want SSD tier performance, or you want just unquestioned reliability, which you should never 100% count on, you should always run some kind of RAID automatic backup, something to ensure that you don't lose anything if a drive dies. And the last thing we're going to talk about is networking. Now, if we go back to this motherboard page here, you see here, now they've got a storage figured out. You can see networking, where is it? I can't find it. Okay, here. It's got 2 gigabit ports, although unless you have a managed network switch and some kind of link aggregation set up on both the thing you want to access it from and the server, you don't want to rely on aggregating those together. So you only want to use one of them, and obviously plug in the additional one for the IPMI and use its own separate port and cable. But yeah, if you just want basic speeds with a gigabit connection, which is going to net you around 100 megs a second, 100 megabytes, not bits, and this is what you want to use. It'll almost certainly be possible with your existing equipment. Basically every networking gear, whether it's the built-in network card on your motherboard or your network switch or anything, it's going to be gigabit. If it was made past like 2008, because that's where gigabit kind of became prevalent, and it still is today. But if you want to go faster than that, if you want a more performance-oriented solution, we can add some faster network cards. So, as you see, we're going to go back to Amazon, and 2.5 gig is kind of the best value for money right now, at least with newer stuff. You can totally buy used, and we're actually going to look at that once we look on Amazon, especially if you want to go like 10 gig, as the prices can sometimes be cheaper. So, see, here we're going to look for a 2.5 gig network adapter. You see here, there's loads of these that are USB. You want PCI Express's servers typically don't have USB 3 ports, and you don't want a dongle hanging off the back of your server. It's kind of the point of putting everything else internally. As you can see here, this is a 2.5 gigabit, which means you can reuse your existing cables. It works over Cat5e just like gigabit does. You can't reuse your existing switches to get, if you want to get the full speed. You have to buy 2.5 gig switches for places where you need that connectivity at the full speed. So that could be a pretty expensive, especially if you want things like managed switches, which I'm not going to get into. The managed versus unmanaged thing. Unmanaged is fine for 95% of people. But yeah, cards like this will work fine hardware-wise. With your operating system, you're going to want to check, like if you're running true NAS versus Open Media Vaults or on RAID. You're going to want to make sure that the actual Ethernet chip on this card will work with your operating system of choice. Now, we're not going to connect the NAS over Wi-Fi. That is just wrong. You can argue with me about it all you want. We just want this thing to work. We don't want to be relying on one of them little tiny Wi-Fi dongles for it to work. I mean, if you absolutely have to connect it with Wi-Fi, say you're on Starlink and you don't have Ethernet because they didn't include it, then you can kind of go for Wi-Fi. But most operating systems won't support, so just stick to Ethernet whenever possible. But yeah, if you want to go even faster, let's say you have multiple SSDs, you might want to go for 10 gig. These are very expensive. That requires specialized switches that are even more expensive than the 2.5 gig ones. If you absolutely need the 10 gig, it might be worth paying these prices, but even gigabit is fine for most people. I only have gigabit. I've been thinking about getting 2.5 gig, but I don't really need it, so I'm not going to spend the money. At least not yet. I'm sure I will at some point. But if you're going to go to a faster speed, obviously you're going to want to make sure you get the proper switch. I really should use like a script or something, although that doesn't really help me in video because I can't read and talk at the same time. Although that's basically what I'm doing. Anyway, just tangent over. You can see there's loads of different options here. You just want to get one that's got the ports you want and the speed you want. I mean, that's kind of all there is to it. If you want to have a managed switch, that's kind of up to you. But yeah, just get what suits you best in terms of that. Now, as far as cases goes, if you're trying to save money, I would highly recommend looking on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, or whatever local listings you might have, because someone might be giving away an old PC case for not a lot of money, and a lot of older cases have loads and loads of specifically 3.5 inch drive bays and 5.25 inch, which you can convert to hold hard drives. But those can be found for pretty cheap. But if you don't have that option, which I don't because I live out in the sticks, there are loads of perfectly good cases out there. But the Fine R5 is kind of expensive, and I don't believe is in production anymore. It's a pretty old design, but it has 8 3.5 inch bays and this sleek looking thing, which despite having a solid front panel, it's actually got half decent airflow. It's plenty for just a basic server. It's not exactly high power hardware in it. You can see it's got noise dampening if silence is a priority. Comes with 2 fans. It's got all these benefits here, but you can do what you want. If you have an old case sitting around and only doing a couple drives, that works. But just make sure it's something that is physically stable, not gonna rust away or anything, which you shouldn't have to worry about. But yeah, just get whatever suits you. You can either buy a new case, which is going to be kind of expensive as most cases don't support loads of hard drives anymore, if any. You can look on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, just do whatever you want. For power supplies, it's basically the same as a normal desktop, except if you're having lots of drives, you're going to need a high wattage power supply, not necessarily for the additional power in terms of energy, but ports, because we're not using Y splitters on our NAS, because Molex to say they'll lose all your data. So if you don't understand power supplies, you just want to get something that you know is going to work and in your system and is somewhat reasonably priced for what it is. Just get this RMX series 750 watt. It's 80 plus gold, so it's really efficient. Has a 10-year warranty. It has, I believe, let's see here, 10 SATA connectors, so you got loads and loads of drive storage. Obviously, if you're going with a dual socket board or something, you're gonna want to make sure that you have the additional connectors. The same rule as before, don't use Y splitters. You can see this one has dual 8 pins for the CPU connector, obviously ATX, all the other stuff. It runs at 0 RPM. It's maglev, a fan that only comes on when it's needed. So like below a certain wattage, it depends on the capacity, but most of them that have this feature, pretty much below like 100 watts, if the temperature is low enough, it'll just cut the fan off entirely, so you save some noise, which may be important to you if you have this in your bedroom or something like mine. Thanks for that. The noise might be of concern, but as far as your case goes, fans, kind of whatever. You can use Noctua, and if the Redux fans, they're kind of the best overall. Yes, there are much cheaper fans out there, but these are quiet. They're reliable. Not the best looking fans, but I'm not aware of anyone who builds RGB servers. Yeah, just get the size you need for your case. But whatever fans you use, if they're the kind that plug into the motherboard, there is a specific note here. God dang it, this thing is getting in the way again. See here. If you go to fan here, it's got 5 4-pin headers, but as you can see, it supports 3-pin fans as well, but without speed control. These things are just gonna run full speed, full brrr, all the time, which if they're loud fans, you might not want. So whatever case fans you get, whatever CPU fans you get, you're gonna want to make sure that they are a 4-pin fan if you want to have speed control on your board, which I'm not going to get into setting up a fan curve because it varies so much depending on the board, and it's kind of convoluted because there's different ways to do it depending on what you have. But just make sure you have 4 pins, because lots of server boards require that for having proper speed control. That's super important, especially on a CPU cooler. Well, I guess not, because we just run at full speed, but yeah. So that's everything we've got here. All of this should allow you to build a pretty decent home server. Don't think I've forgotten anything. See, a case, power supply, fans, coolers, CPU, motherboard, memory, storage. I think I said that already. Yeah, I got everything. So if you're having trouble picking out what to build your own NAS with in terms of hardware, this is what you are needing. This video should kind of guide you in the right direction. Again, highly recommend stuff like this with this. They're amazing value for what they are. They have all the features of the IPMI, and it's not even that crazy expensive compared to what the pre-built NAS solutions are, because you could easily pay $260 for a dual bay NAS without drives that's got a little dual core Celeron in it. That in terms of performance, it's going to get smoked by this. But if you're want to go the full DIY route, this video should have everything you need. I may or may not properly edit this. I may just upload it raw as it is. We'll have to see, depending on how lazy I get, because pretty lazy, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, hope this video helped y'all. See you next time.